Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and we are here for my LTA North Round 2 overview and analysis video. We've got 3 series to cover today. We are going to know 2 more teams that end up getting eliminated in 5th and 6th place respectively. Not going to be a bottom 2 finish for anybody here today, as we talked about the first 2 teams getting eliminated last week, but the big one is winners finals. We're also going to be covering that. The winner of that series will immediately be in the finals. Both of those teams have already qualified for the cross-region rivalry, thing against the LTA South, so they're fine in that regard, but still, winning the LTA North is a pretty big accomplishment, so I'm excited to go over everything here today. If you are excited, let me know down in the comment section below. What did you expect from the series here in the video that we're going to cover, and did they live up to your expectations? Were you potentially surprised by either the outcomes or how we got there? I'm just curious to know where you guys are landing on a lot of the teams that both are remaining and aren't remaining in terms of the video, but let's go ahead and get into things. Don't want to waste your guys' time too much. If you are new here, what we're going to do is go series by series, talking about the advantages and disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I'll be giving a player of the series and a dud of the series for each series that we cover, and at the end of the video, we'll be looking at the updated playoff bracket. Remember, only 4 teams will remain by the end of this video, and 3 of them end up going to that, Worlds qualification, like regional qualifier, whatever you want to call it, between the LTA North and LTA South. So winning a series here today gives you basically either a 100 or a 50% chance to get in no matter where you stand. But most of today will be spent talking about the games themselves, so let's get into it. We're going to start with the lower bracket matchups and, finish off with winners finals. That's the order that they went in terms of the games actually being played, and that means we kick it off with a pretty interesting one that I thought was going to be a massive blowout that actually turned into a very interesting back and forth series. It was the number 1 seeded Cloud9 taking on the number 5 seeded Disguised, and Cloud9 is going to pick up the win, but they're going to do it in 5 games. They go the distance. They almost get reverse swept by Disguised, and they put up a hell of a fight in this series for a team that was as big of an underdog as DSG was. I'm stunned that they not only were able to win a game or 2, but to do it in such good fashion. Game 3 was pretty back and forth, and they just kind of outplayed them in the back end, and Game 4 was all DSG. Like, they actually just ran everything with XU on the Silas, and, they were able to take over with Rahel on the Lucian and Huhi on the Braum. Really big stuff. Even Castle, I think, had a great game on the Jax there in Game 4, but at the end of the day, Cloud9 locked in for game number 5. They got their Koreans onto some, off-meta picks, we'll just say, with the Rek'Sai in the top lane and the Zeri in the mid lane, and they ended up making the most of it. And that's why Loki is getting player of the series for me, because I actually just think that he solo won game 5. I can't say solo won. That's unfair to Thanatos, who also had a really great game on the Rek'Sai and was very good throughout most of this series. But Loki was definitely the guy here in game number 5 on this Zeri pick. Boy, did they need him to step up and really take over, and he did exactly that. He was able to get a ton of resources, and by the time he hit 2 or 3 kills, the snowball had started, and it really wasn't going to ever be let down. There's no real easy way to trap Zeri in terms of the way that, a fearless game number 5 is set up. Like, you have a Jarvan on the other side, but good luck. Like, she can just jump over the wall. Rakan is probably your best bet if you can charm her, but Loki's going to be playing really safe in a lot of these fights, and especially if Loki can get early kills, which is exactly what happened in game number 5. It just kind of gets out of control a little bit too quickly. So credit to Loki. I continue to be a big fan of his. Do I think he was perfect throughout this series? Absolutely not. There were multiple games where I think he played quite questionable. I think specifically, in my opinion, the Rise in game number 3. I think some people might disagree with that take, but wasn't a big fan of his Rise game. I think the Hui was whatever in game number 4, but you can definitely look at him being solid in games 1 and 2. Really a big part of why they were able to generate a lead, especially on the Azir in game 1, where the Yone was not relevant on the other side. And of course, he's getting this for game number 5, and they needed to win that game number 5. So Cloud9 avoiding disaster by Loki stepping up and really performing. But Thanatos is probably the other player that you want to shout out here. I don't think Castle was that bad, but he really was better in their wins. You can look at the KDA of 21, 16, and 17 and see a pretty strong player. Almost all of that is coming with the exception of games 2 and 5, where he was just not good at all. And I think that really kind of showcases where Thanatos ended up stepping up and really being able to showcase his dominance is those matchups, the Renekton into Gwen matchup, and then the Rek'Sai into Gnar matchup, where he's just able to get these big leads and really kind of translate that into mid-game pressure. That's what Thanatos has always done at an elite level, and he continued to do that here. The 2 best players on Cloud9 stepped up here today. I think you could make an argument that Vulcan is a top 2 player on this team, but really at this point, it's quite clear that Thanatos is the best player on Cloud9. Everybody kind of knows that, and they've known that all year long. And Loki, to me, is the second best player and the second most important player, them being better than their opposition, and specifically in a meta where solo lanes are so important, for them to be able to step up in a series like this was really important, and they did just that. Everybody else on the team, though, very questionable play. I think specifically coming out of Blabber and Vulcan, they really needed to be better in this series, and they just weren't. I think Blabber had a couple of good moments early on in the series on things like Wukong and Trundle, but man, he played terrible in the back half of this series. He absolutely ended up selling this team, and honestly, this is the first time in his entire career where I've ever felt like, oh man, is Blabber like really on the decline? Like, is he not even a top 3 or top 4 jungler in North America right now? Has this guy lost his status as somebody that should be, perennially employed by one of the top teams in the league? Like, you're genuinely having that question about Blabber right now, because even on a lot of the things that he is good at, it's not necessarily working out at the moment. It just kind of feels like not only is he kind of the antithesis of how this team wants to play the game, but on top of that, it feels like he is not living up to his own sense of promise. His mechanical skill has certainly gone down. His ability to generate leads in the early game is not nearly as good as it has been the past couple of years. There are a lot of genuine question marks. There have been a lot of negative reports about Blabber the past couple of years, but I've kind of dismissed them, at least on this channel, as overreacting to splits that maybe weren't MVP worthy, but were still all-pro worthy. He's been nowhere near the all-pro list for me throughout 2025 so far, and I think that's just a terrible thing to say about probably the most successful jungler in the history of North American League of Legends. So, we'll see. Hopefully he can, start to step up, but if they lost this series, he was going to be the biggest reason why, because I just think he made a ton of terrible plays here today. I think Vulcan is a part of that conversation as well. I think for the most part, it's really just the non-playmakers that he struggles on. When he gets the agency to go out and really affect the map on things like Bard and Nico, he really is able to do a lot with that, and he's kind of showcased that throughout the entirety of the year. We've seen that pretty consistently out of North American supports. The ones that are better and more aggressive on these playmakers are the ones who are going to succeed more, but, things like Alistair later on in the draft, they just couldn't find nearly the consistent engage angle that they can with things like Nico on Alistair, because it's so much harder for that champion to be like the only piece of setup for the entire comp. You need somebody else to do something there, and it just kind of didn't happen. Vulcan also had a couple of really bad engages, I would say, throughout this series, which was a bit frustrating. Sven's stats are better than his gameplay was. I think he was fine, generally speaking. I think people are going to critique him, but honestly, he was better than Rahel in this series, who made a ton of mistakes positioning-wise on the other side, and that's good enough for me. I don't think Sven is a superstar. I think he's decently stable, but it's clear that Cloud9 absolutely has weaknesses and that they can be exploited. I'm somewhere in the middle, I think, of where public sentiment is on this team coming out of this series. I've seen a lot of people either, hyping them up like, oh, it doesn't matter, Cloud9's going to be fine. They're still a top 2 team and they're still going to go to finals and compete with FlyQuest. And I've seen, more often now, people being really doomer about this team, talking about how, oh, it doesn't matter who wins between Team Liquid and 100 Thieves. Cloud9 would lose to both. I don't think either of those statements are true. I don't think the good is all true. I think this team is clearly, just mental blocked right now. Like in these big moments, Cloud9 has not been able to step up this year, nor were they able to last year, nor were they able to the year before. And I think so much of that just has become systemic, despite the fact that this has been an organization that has historically been known as the most consistent in the league. But even more so than that, like, I do think there's just something generally broken about their play style right now, but they should still be a finals team, right? Like, this is still a top-ish team in the league. I think the real thing that I just don't believe in is like, oh, this team is worse than 100 Thieves. I think you genuinely have to be reaching into oblivion in order to feel that, and we'll talk about the series that's coming up after this, but like Team Liquid, 100 Thieves, like to say that those teams are better than even a weakened version of Cloud9 right now, and maybe this ages terribly, feels ridiculous to even try and claim. I just don't even think they're on the same level in terms of the talent that they have at their disposal. Again, maybe Cloud9 is not utilizing that talent to its fullest display, but we saw in this series, at the end of the day, just get Loki and Thanatos on carries and they're going to win you games. Like, that simplified process, other teams don't have the luxury of having that like Cloud9 does with the level of talent they have on the roster. So as bad as this team played in this series, and as frustrating as it is to see them almost get reverse swept by a team that was, for the most part, the worst team in the league for a majority of this year, I do think that they still have upside moving forward. And for Disguised on the other side, honestly, shout out this team. This is a team that felt like they were in a nightmare position going into the summer split. They make a bunch of roster changes. Darkwings comes in. Rahel comes in. People are frustrated because Scary Jerry is getting benched. And, as much as I can, advocate for Rahel, a lot of people are still frustrated that it's an import over a player that seemed to be developing. And Darkwings was never a player that dominated tier 2. And so the question was, can Disguised come in and even be anything other than bottom 1? Well, they're definitely not bottom 1. Dignitas was clearly bottom 1. But right now, it's kind of looking like they were better than a team like Lion anyways because of the fight they were able to put up in this series, and they definitely got better over the course of this year. Dud of the series for me, unfortunately, is going to go to their new mid laner, Darkwings, but I think it is kind of up in the air. In a best of 5, it's really hard to find a dud of the series unless somebody just actively sold multiple games. For the most part, Darkwings was generally fine in their wins. He was actually pretty positive in their wins and just played kind of bad on the Yone and the Cassio, and that really is just what it comes down to. If you have 1 or 2, remotely bad games, you're probably getting dead of the series in a best of 5. I can't stress enough just how difficult it is to assign that award when games are, this volatile, but Darkwings needed to step up in some big moments, and I just don't think he was good enough in their losses in order to justify it. I think Loki was better on the other side, and I think Loki had an easy time being able to generate resources, and part of that is the fault of Darkwings. It's not just his fault. Honestly, I considered giving dud of the series to Rahel because I really just hated the way that he positioned in this series. I think he actually let his team down in a lot of really pivotal moments, and the question for Rahel was not, is the talent there? It's that, okay, on SK, it really felt like when he started going up against actual good talent, he was really good in lane and then just couldn't, stay consistent outside of lane. I don't think anything changed in terms of perception in a series like this where he had the chance to kind of be the hero, and it just didn't really happen. I do want to give a couple of shout outs. I think Castle was pretty solid, again, especially in their wins in this series, the Jax in Game 4, the Sion in Game 3. Outside of Game 2 and Game 5, I think you can really look at most of this being positive for him. I think XU was generally better than I anticipated him being in this series. I think when you look at Blabber versus XU, you would imagine this is very Cloud9 favored, and, for the most part it was, but not the entire time. It certainly wasn't. XU certainly had moments, and I think that's good. Huki still does a lot more for this team and is clearly the anchor point, kind of the one that pushes them forward and also holds them back in terms of how they play macro-wise. But, Disguise put up such a good fight that it's, cool to see. They have a lot of momentum because their year is not done. Unlike teams like Dignitas and Lion that were out last week, Disguise still has the promotion relegation tournament because they are in the guest spot, and so they need to make sure they have as much momentum as possible to retain their spot in the LTA North. With so many teams like Luminosity coming for them right now, they need to make sure they're in the best possible place they can be to hold on to that spot. But for Cloud9, they stay alive here in the playoffs. They move on to take on the winner of the series we're going to talk about next. They're going to be favorites against either of those two in that series. Spoiler alert for the end of the video, because I just think it's ridiculous that people are talking about Cloud9 like they're not even top 3, but I understand why there is some frustration around this team. This should have been an easier series for them, and we need to see more in the upcoming weeks. But then moving on now to our second of the lower bracket series and our second of the elimination series of this video. And it was a decently big upset, at least for me. It was Team Liquid taking on 100 Thieves, the number 4 seed taking on the number 7 seed. And 100 Thieves is going to pick up the 3-0 victory. I'm not surprised that 100 Thieves were able to pick this up. I think that there were a lot of people that were hyping them up, and generally public sentiment had almost completely turned around on them because they beat Lion, which I do want to say, I don't mean to sound like a hater, beating Lion, not that big of a deal. Like, quite frankly, it's really not one of those accomplishments where it's like, oh, 100 Thieves is for real. Saint was bad in the series. Like, yeah, it happens, man. Like, Lion's inconsistent. They have been the entirety of the year. They have yet to be anything other than a bottom 2 team in terms of actual production, but good for 100 Thieves to get here. This is the result, though, that I think really elevates 100 Thieves stock to potentially top 4. I think it's really up to just, where you want to put that. Do you think Disguise would have been better than this 100 Thieves team? I think there is some sort of argument there, but right now, 100 Thieves is in the top 4 and Team Liquid isn't. And you know what? This is the only thing you can say about it is that this split for Team Liquid was the biggest disaster they could have possibly had. There is no way to talk about what happened here for TL without it being framed in a negative light, because they were the champions in split 1 in winter. They were a team that competed at the very least in spring and just kind of got upset in the playoffs. For them to be so underwhelming in the regular season, to drop a series to Lion and then come into the playoffs and not win a single best of 5, it's frustrating because it really does feel like this team got worse over the course of this year. And yeah, the other teams got better, but are we truly saying that 100 Thieves is not a team that Team Liquid, even at their worst, should have beaten? Like, that's not the case, right? Like, 100 Thieves, they're not all that. Like, Team Liquid just played bad here today, and it really just is that. So we'll go ahead and talk about it. 400 Thieves, player of the series is going to Quid. I mean, this is the Quid kind of experience. This is not something we really got in round number 1. It felt like that it was much more of a team effort in round 1, where in this series, kind of similar to what we talked about with Cloud9, it really was the solo laners that were in a really good spot. Not to say everybody didn't win on the side of 100 Thieves, because when you 3-0 a team like like Team Liquid, you're winning everywhere across the map. You're mental booming them. You are absolutely demolishing them. But Quid really was the main character for 100 Thieves. I think especially on the Orianna and the Aurora in the first couple of games, that's what secured his player of the series for me. As much as I love his Rise game in Game 3, which, by the way, very funny stuff, watching Quid just, like, free hit, and we'll talk about Core JJ, but watching Quid just, like, free hit on Yon during a lot of these team fights, and Core just, like, standing in front of him, not pressing any buttons on Nautilus. Like, it's just, like, it's crazy. Like, the mental boom in this series was very real, but I think that there were a lot of players in Game 3 that really ended up stepping up. It was the Orianna and the Aurora that really solidified Quid's status as the player of the series. He can have games like this and series like this where he just plays like the #1 mid laner in the league. I think talent-wise, I will continue to die on the hill that he is the most talented mid laner in North America right now. I don't think there's anybody that can go up against him from a talent perspective and from a raw mechanics perspective. It's all just about whether or not he can be put in a position to carry. He is a very resource-heavy player. He kind of needs to be the main character in terms of how drafts and how early game setups go. River is happy to give over resources like that, but Quid, very much in the comfort zone, in the driver's seat when he can play really aggro, and that's exactly what he did in this series. The other player I really want to shout out, Big Dokes on the top side. Dokla, I thought, played fantastic. A lot of people have their best series of the year against Impact. I'm not alone in, talking about how bad Impact has been throughout all of 2025. Even when this team was good, Impact was bad. On the top side, he actively sold this team's chances at first stand at the beginning of this year alongside They were both terrible at that tournament, and then he comes back domestically and is arguably like a bottom 3 top laner for the entire rest of the year. It's just not been good. Like, he even pulls out his signature gangplank in game number 3, and he gets bodied by Dokla. That's Dokla's best game of the entire series, and it might be his best game back in the LTA. This has been a massive upgrade in the top lane. I loved what Sniper was doing in the spring split, but it really felt like it was falling apart again in summer, and with that confidence getting shattered, and him not being good before that, winter of last year and summer of last year just kind of being negative. Getting a top laner that can be more stable because you don't have time to develop these players anymore. It's the last split ever for 100 Thieves. Like, bringing Dokla in has clearly just been a win now type of upgrade because he has been better in the top lane. It's good to see Big Dokes get another opportunity. He was supposed to be on Nightmare at the beginning of this year. Everything falls through. He was coaching and, all of this stuff. He has stepped in and become a very good top laner again. This is something that's happened to this guy over and over again, where he's been overlooked by a lot of teams only to get reinserted and to do really well in his opportunity. River was excellent. We'll talk about UG on the other side. Unfortunately for UG, he just wasn't ready to step into the shoes of Team Liquid this year. He had a pretty terrible time playing in Tier 1. I think he's going to be fine moving forward. I hope that either this org or some other top-tier org does give him the time to develop, because as a prospect, we haven't seen better in a very long time. But, UG just wasn't up to the task today. And River, this is likely his last year ever playing competitive, or at the very least, that's kind of how he's talking. Right now, it's cool to see him show up and perform really well in this playoff run as an enabler. He's arguably been the most important piece so far for 100 Thieves. FBI and Alo are really solid. Yon and Core are the best part of Team Liquid, and if 100 Thieves' bot lane was just going to be better, even if they didn't have quite as much setup, that's really good. Like, that's absolutely massive for them. So everywhere across the map, you just want to give a lot of praise to 100 Thieves, because I think this team is overachieving to the max right now. This was a team that was in finals. This was a finals matchup in split number 1. To see 100 Thieves finally figure it out when their backs are up against the wall for the final time, pretty cool stuff. And for Team Liquid on the other side, it's just a nightmare. Like, honestly, I don't even really know what to say. This is worst case scenario for Team Liquid. No one could have ever predicted that this would be a team that goes out in 5th at the end of the year. Maybe you wanted to make the argument that Shopify would figure it out and get top 3, because that upset in the spring split could have been real. But even then, like, I thought Team Liquid was the 3rd best team in the league going into this split. I just figured that they were going to be able to figure it out with the amount of talent that they have on this roster, but they are so much less than the sum of their parts right now. And I'm not trying to say that bringing in UG was the wrong move, because I still think that long-term wise, it's correct to go and get the hyper prospect that's going to try and make your team better, but this team absolutely was better with I don't really think there's any sort of argument. All they have done since UG has become a starting jungler has underperformed, and UG has not looked good. He's looked at his best, I would say he's looked like a top 4 jungler in the LTA, like during his best games. At his worst, he has not looked like an upper tier jungler, and the more games I would say towards the negative than the positive. It's not just him though. I don't even think he really was the biggest problem individually in this series. I have to give it to Core JJ just for that Nautilus game in Game 3. Not that the Blitzcrank or the Alistair were any better. This guy was so mental boomed, it's actually crazy. And I know I kind of get flamed in the comment section every time I say anything negative about Core JJ, because everybody just kind of worships the ground he walks on, and I've always been a bit lower on him, at least in the past year and a half. Like, I'm not trying to pretend like that prime Core JJ was anything other than the best support North America has ever seen, but like, I mean, what do you want me to say, man? Like, he sold game number 3 on the Nautilus. It was a 4v5. He was not even trying trying to play the game. Like, genuinely, he was standing there watching because he had mental boomed. There's nothing else left to say. Part of that is because the rest of the team had been terrible throughout the rest of the series. APA got so mega gapped by Quid. It was actually just ridiculous. And he got so many of his signature champions and was still terrible on them. That is a bad sign. Impact was just a nightmare in 2025. If you want a single person to look at and say, I'm not sure anyone was more detrimental to their own team's success throughout 2025, Impact is a huge candidate for that, coming off of an MVP caliber year where he was the best top laner in North America, or at the very least, in the conversation for the best top laner in North America. For him to come out in 2025 and be as shitty as he was, it's just frustrating. And again, I don't want to, it's the last time I get to say it. So, I've basically said it in every video, might as well cap it off. Impact is always really good in his first year on a new team. His first year coming to a new org, he looks fantastic and he looks reinvigorated as a player. And then year 2, year 3, just progressively gets worse as he plays more time on the same organization. The same thing happened here with Team Liquid. I would be stunned if he is their starting top laner going into next year. Even Jan underperformed here today. I really did not think he was as good as he needed to be. I mean, so much responsibility is on his shoulders, but he didn't really step up. It just kind of comes down to the fact that Team Liquid have all this talent and didn't really go anywhere with it. I still think there's a core you can build around here. I think you need to keep Jan. He is your franchise player. UG is somebody that if you invested into him this year, you better bring him back for next year, because the only reason that you brought him in was for the long term, because, it didn't work out in the short term. So I think you kind of are forced into investing into him. I think everyone else is potentially expendable. Maybe you bring Core JJ back if he wants to. I think he would still be one of the best supports in the league, but I think solo laners I would expect to kind of be swapped out. They've been looking for a mid laner for a while, and as much as I do like APA, and I do think he had a pretty good year, I understand why this team would want to look in a different direction, and I would be stunned if Impact is back for 2025. So for Team Liquid, it's not even the 4th place curse. Like, it's not even the meme at this point. They genuinely are the 5th place team in the league, and that is as disappointing as it gets. And for 100 Thieves on the other side, this is a massive win. This team was winless in the regular season. Let's not pretend like they were competent. I get that their quote-unquote schedule was so hard, and, pick and play kind of makes it hard for bottom-tier teams. They were losing to other bottom-tier teams. This looked like a team that had mentally checked out, that had nowhere to go, and they feel completely reinvigorated. There is real talent on this team with players like Quib and River and even FBI and Ayla. Doka's been great so far on the top side. I think that they have a long road ahead of them. They're major underdogs going into the series against Cloud9, but that's kind of where they've been throughout this entire playoff run, and so far, it's still working out for them. But that's going to bring us to our winners finals matchup. We have done our 2 lower bracket matchups. Both of these teams have already qualified for the cross-conference, matchup here to qualify for Worlds. They are doing this for pride at this point, and boy, was one team definitely a little bit prideful in this one. It was the number 2 seeded FlyQuest taking on the number 3 seeded Shopify Rebellion, and FlyQuest are going to pick up the 3-1 series win. Not quite a sweep, but boy, did it feel like it, just in terms of how this series went. Credit to Shopify for picking up that game number 2. If that game didn't happen, we'd be talking very differently about how this ended up going. But even now, with this 3-1 series win, Fly completely disrespected Shopify Rebellion. They put in their substitute top laner for game number 2, because at the end of the day, this series means absolutely nothing. And even losing this series might be considered a positive, because you get to play more games. You get to play down in the semifinals to qualify for finals, and then potentially finals as well. So you might get even more stage practice, which is generally a good thing at this point for teams that want to qualify for Worlds. But then it's not just Gatghost coming in for game number 2. It's Tryndamere Jungle in game number 4. You guys already know that we're going to talk about this first. Inspired's not player of the series. I didn't consider him for player of the series. You probably know why, but boy, is this the thing that people are going to take away from this FlyQuest best of 5. Tryndamere's genuinely very strong right now. He has been played in multiple roles throughout a lot of this year in other regions. Places like top lane and mid lane have had Tryndamere games. Jungle, not so much, but I can definitely see the angle for it here with the things that were drafted. If you can get on Hui or Corki, it can be pretty easy to just kind of terrorize the game, and Inspired did exactly that. But he's not player of the series. Anybody who watched knows player of the series is going to Quad in the mid lane. Astronomical mid gap in this series. You want to talk about, Quid did really well and Loki did really well. And, all 3 series had a mid lane player of the series here. It was different in this one. I cannot stress enough just how big the gap between these 2 in the mid lane was. Like, the KDA doesn't necessarily reflect it. Palafox obviously doesn't look particularly good from his KDA, but we're talking like 70 CS leads in the mid lane almost every single game. We're talking him getting stuck under tower and not being able to participate or play on things like Galio and things like Orianna that need to be out on the map and helping helping the team. Quad was just taking away every single option that Palafox had against him, and that's really, really bad for Palafox. And, we'll talk about it for Shopify, but you live by Palafox, you die by Palafox. The big reason why this team has really turned around their fate and fortune from the beginning of the year is because Palafox has been so much better in the second half of the year. I think he is the biggest turnaround, and if he's going to get slaughtered in a series like this, if he's going to start playing like early spring split or winter split Palafox again, yeah, this team's cooked. Like, they're actually doomed. We were talking about this guy losing his LTA spot. That was the version of Palafox that showed up today, and Quad full took advantage of it. You can look at literally all three of their wins. The Victor, the Rise, the Sintra, all of it was nightmarishly bad for Palafox. Like, for Quad just dominated throughout this series, and there was nobody who deserved a player of the series more than he did in terms of the voting here. Inspired obviously does deserve a shout out for that Trendemir game number 4, but even his tank games at the beginning of this series can't outpace what Quad was doing against Palafox in the mid lane. Busio continues to be absolutely excellent for this team. How he's still allowing to get things like Bard in game number 1, I have no idea. I don't know why you're not banning out that champion permanently against FlyQuest alongside things like Nico. I think those two have to be permabans. This team looks so much better on those champs than they do on almost anything else, and at that point, you kind of have to ban out Cassio. You don't want to give Inspired a lot of his big picks. It becomes really difficult to end up, drafting and banning against FlyQuest because they have so many signature things that they like going for. But Busio was also great on the Rakan in game 4. Masu was super consistent, didn't have to do a whole ton, and B-Boy was generally fine on the other side of this matchup, but Masu was good. Bwipo was good. Without Gekko's kind of tanking his KDA a little bit, Bwipo would have been like 8-3, 8-3 and like, I don't know, 20-something throughout this series. Gekko's, unfortunately, with a 1-3 performance in game number 2 on the Rumble, kind of tanking the overall KDA there. Just as a reminder, Gekko's only playing game number 2. Bwipo played games 1, 3, and 4, which, of course, FlyQuest ended up winning. They had nothing to play for here. They were genuinely just flexing on Shopify Rebellion, and that's the most disrespectful part. Fly's really good. Big surprise. And for Shopify, I keep waiting for the wheels to come off of this team because I do think they're outperforming their talent level by so much. But honestly, this series kind of confirms that they are exactly who we thought they were. That if Palafox shows up, they're going to be fine. And when Palafox can't show up and when the enemy mid laner just wins, they are the exact same team they were before. That has been the thing that has changed for Shopify. B-Boy, I think, has gotten more consistent. Contracts has gotten more opportunities, but he was already playing pretty well at the beginning of the year. I think Fudge was playing better than people gave him credit for. Seas has always been fine for this team. It really was mid that was the pivot point. And so when you're talking about Palafox playing better, when you have a series like this where he gets run over, yeah, Shopify get absolutely rolled. There's not really a lot that they can do in order to stay relevant in a series like this. And I think some Shopify fans are going to get frustrated by that take, but it really is like, okay, if Palafox can go toe-to-toe and can be good enough to face your enemy mid laner, you're going to be fine. But I'm kind of worried about the matchup against either like 100 Thieves or Cloud9, because if Loki or Quid can just beat up on Palafox, can Shopify win a series? Probably not. And so he's done in the series. You need him to step up. You need him to be better, because I do think he kind of holds the key to Shopify Rebellion's, entire year in his hands. If he can step up, they're in a pretty decent spot. Everybody else was fine. I guess Fudge got mega outplayed by Bwipo throughout most of this series, but Contracts wasn't really the problem. I think B-Boy and Seas were at least trying to be aggressive and make plays, but generally Shopify was always on the back foot because the middle of the map was always in favor of FlyQuest, and that means that they're going to be able to run things. Credit to game number 2, though. That generally was a good game all around, including for Palafox. But again, I just don't have a lot of faith that Shopify is a top 2 team in the league. Maybe they prove me wrong. Maybe they can, overcome a weakened Cloud9 or somehow a major upset with 100 Thieves, booking their way to the World's qualification tournament. But right now, it really does feel like Shopify is kind of destined to be a team that is the barrier check, that they're going to be better than the teams that are kind of getting in their own way. Maybe not quite as good as teams like Fly that actually have a game plan and can stress their strengths. Quad, to me, is the weak link of FlyQuest, and I've said that all year long. If he is going to play like this, Fly is very, very dangerous. This team is by far the best team in North America, and all they did here was reassert that in an astounding degree. All right, but that is going to do it for my LTA North Round 2 overview and analysis video up on the screen, the updated bracket, and we've only got 4 more teams remaining. One of them punched their way to at least domestic finals already with FlyQuest. The other, kind of guaranteed themselves into the top 3, and so they will be at the World's qualification tournament against the LTA South in Shopify Rebellion here in the semifinals. But the big matchup here is Cloud9 taking on 100 Thieves. The winner of this, of course, is going to push their way into the top 3. The loser will be done for the year. It does not matter for Cloud9 that they've been top 2 for a majority of this year. If they lose this one series, they are done. My prediction, though, is that that's not going to happen. I think Cloud9 is going to be able to win this series. I think that they're better than 100 Thieves. I think they drop a game. I think that 3-1 is a pretty realistic projection. I still think Cloud9 have things they need to clean up, but I'm still much higher and I think much lower on 100 Thieves than a lot of people out there. I think that this team has taken advantage of weaknesses really well, but the problems that they had in the regular season, they're not just all gone. Quid is very good, but FBI and Ayla have not been able to find that same spark that they had at the beginning of the year, and if you can take River out of his control in the early game, then it's still a pretty difficult matchup. I think Thanatos is way better than Dokla on the top side of the map. I just imagine Cloud9 having too much talent to really be faltered by 100 Thieves. Maybe I'm wrong. We'll see how that ends up going, but let me know down in the comments what you think, what you expect to happen in this series. Do you think it's going to go as I anticipate with Cloud9 being favored, even if they drop a game or two? Or do you think 100 Thieves should be considered favorites? They've looked better in the playoffs. They certainly looked better against their own opposition in Team Liquid, who is a better team than Disguised in round number 2. Do you think 100 Thieves is going to win this series? Let me know down in the comment section below, but that's going to do it. I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. Lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button. Of course, we're going to be covering everything else in the playoffs here in the LTA North, and that includes the qualification tournament against the LTA South for who ends up going to Worlds, so stick around for that. But we also cover all 3 of the other major regions, so LEC, LCK, and LPL every single week in their playoffs on the channel. Here we've been covering the NACL every single playoff series on this channel, so if you want a comprehensive overview of everything going on in LoL Esports, this is the place for it. Hit subscribe and hit that bell so you can be notified when those videos do go live. As a reminder, I am still casting for LPL English. I will be live for multiple playoff series throughout the LPL playoffs. Links to that are going to be down in the description below, not the comment section, the description below, the YouTube, the Twitch. It's all going to be linked down there. Follow, subscribe on whatever platform you prefer, and come say hi in chat. Definitely will be around for quite a few of the playoff series upcoming, but with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all